His text was a prayer sent to a ghost. Her response was $1 million mistake that saved them both. Family and friends, we are back. I have missed you all terribly. We've battled some nasty tech issues, but we're finally powering through. If you've ever wanted to support the channel, now is the time. Subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss a thing. Let me know in the comments where you're joining from, because tomorrow's story is just as wild as this one. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Now let's dive back in. The city hummed its indifferent nocturnal song outside Leo's window, a symphony of distant sirens and muffled traffic that had long since faded into background noise. Inside apartment 4B, the only music was the ragged, feverish whimper of his 8-month-old daughter Lily. "I know, sweetheart, I know," Leo murmured, his voice gravelly with a fatigue that had seeped into his bones. He paced the short, worn length of the living room, his daughter a small, burning weight against his chest. Her tiny body was a furnace, radiating a heat that terrified him. The pediatrician's words from that afternoon echoed in his skull, sharp and clinical. "It's a robust ear infection, Mr. Thorne. This new antibiotic is essential. Without it, the fever could spike and we risk complications." Complications. A sterile medical word for a parent's hell. His eyes scanned the dim room, taking in the evidence of his failure. The last can of formula sat empty on the counter. A small stack of envelopes on the rickety table seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Final notices, all of them. The disconnection notice for the electricity was on top. He'd sold his late wife Clara's jewelry months ago. He'd pawned his own father's watch. All he had left of any value was the simple gold band on his own finger, a promise he'd made to her, and the ghost of the man he used to be. A man who built beautiful things from wood, whose hands were stained with varnish, not the grime of constant worry. He stopped pacing and looked at the photograph on the wall. Clara, her smile forever captured in sunlight, her arms wrapped around him on the opening day of his small woodworking shop, Thorne and Splinter. It felt like a photograph from someone else's life. "I'm trying, Clara," he whispered to the photo, his throat tight. "I'm trying so hard. But I'm drowning." Lily's cry escalated, sharp and piercing. He jiggled her gently, shushing her, his own panic rising. He needed that medicine. The $200 might as well have been $2 million. He'd called everyone. His pride, the last vestige of that man in the photograph, had been systematically dismantled call by call. His brother was tapped out. His old friends had slowly drifted away, unsure how to handle a widower with a baby. Desperation, a cold and cunning strategist, laid out his final, pathetic move. His wife's cousin, a woman named Clara after his late wife, had once years ago offhandedly said, "If you ever need anything," he'd saved her number out of politeness. Now it was a lifeline he was too ashamed to grasp, but too desperate to ignore. His hands trembled as he picked up his cheap crack-screen phone. The battery icon was red. Of course it was. He found the contact. Clara, cousin. He opened a new message thread, his vision blurring with unshed tears and exhaustion. He typed, each word a piece of his soul chipped away and digitized. "Claire, I'm begging you. It's Lily. The doctor said she needs the medicine and I don't have it. I'm $200 short. I'll pay you back anything, just please, she's so hot and she won't stop crying." He didn't reread it. He couldn't. With a gut-wrenching lurch of his heart, a final surrender, he pressed send. Across the city, in a penthouse that seemed to float among the stars, Elara Vance was also awake. Silence here was a curated experience, purchased and engineered. The only sound was the almost imperceptible whisper of central air, maintaining a perfect 70 degrees. The floor-to-ceiling windows presented a breathtaking panoramic view of the glittering metropolis, a kingdom she had conquered with her mind, a revolutionary algorithm that had birthed a tech empire. She stood before the glass, a silhouette of sharp angles and cashmere, a glass of expensive bourbon in her hand, untouched. The lights of the city were like a field of diamonds, cold and distant. This was the pinnacle. This was everything she had worked for since the day her fiancé, David, had looked at her with pity and said, "Your ambition is beautiful, Alara, but it's also terrifying. I can't love a monument. I need a person." He'd walked out, and she had poured every ounce of her being into becoming an unassailable monument, a fortress of her own making. Her phone, a sleek black slate that was an extension of her being, lay silent on the marble countertop. No one texted her at this hour. No one texted her with anything that wasn't related to business. Her personal life was a meticulously guarded, empty room. A chime broke the silence. Sharp, unexpected. She frowned, crossing the cool floor. She picked up the phone. An unknown number. Probably a wrong number or some investor who'd gotten her details through a back channel. She was about to dismiss the notification when her thumb, acting on a whim of profound boredom and a flicker of something else, curiosity, tapped the screen. The message loaded. And the world, Alara Vance's perfectly controlled, meticulously ordered world, tilted on its axis. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt you had absolutely nowhere left to turn? What was the one thread of hope you held on to? The text hung on Alara's screen, a stark, digital scream in the heart of her silent sanctuary. She read it once, then again, and a third time her brain, usually a whirlwind of algorithmic logic and market predictions, was struggling to process the raw, unfiltered humanity of it. "Claire, I'm begging you. It's Lily. The doctor said she needs the medicine and I don't have it. I'm $200 short. I'll pay you back anything, just please, she's so hot and she won't stop crying." Asterisk. It was the ellipsis at the end that undid her. The trailing off, the unsaid terror. This wasn't a request. It was a confession. A prayer sent to a void he believed was occupied by a savior. Her first instinct, honed by years of fending off gold diggers and sycophants, was cold and sharp. A scam. A new, sophisticated form of phishing, preying on emotion rather than greed. It was almost clever. But as her eyes traced the words, asterisk, she's so hot, asterisk, she could almost feel the phantom heat of a child's fevered brow. She could almost hear the desperate, silent plea in the spaces between the words. Her thumb hovered over the delete button. One tap. That's all it would take to erase this digital intruder and return to her curated silence. She didn't tap. Instead, she found herself walking back to the window, the city lights now seeming less like diamonds and more like a million other windows, behind which a million other dramas were unfolding. One of them involved a man named Leo, a baby named Lily, and a desperate need for $200. A sum so trivial to her it was a rounding error. A sum so monumental to him it stood between his child and potential disaster. A memory, long buried, surfaced with the force of a physical blow. She was 7 years old, clutching her mother's hand in a cold emergency room. Her mother, proud and poor, arguing with the triage nurse in a hushed, frantic tone about insurance, about payment plans. The shame in her mother's eyes, the way her grip had tightened on Alara's small hand. They had waited for hours. Alara had never forgotten the cold of that vinyl seat, or the hot sting of tears she'd been too proud to shed. She looked down at her phone, the screen now dark. She pressed the button, illuminating the message again. "She's so hot and she won't stop crying." This was no scam. This was a ghost from her own past, a digital echo of a pain she had spent a lifetime and a fortune trying to outrun. Back in apartment 4B, Leo's momentary relief at having sent the plea curdled instantly into a sickening dread. The act of sending it had been cathartic, a release of pressure. But now, in the ensuing silence, reality crashed back in, colder and harder than before. He looked at the contact name again. Clara, cousin. And then he saw it. The area code. It was wrong. His Clara lived in the 347 area code. The number he'd texted was a 646. In his exhaustion, in the bleary, panic-fueled haze, he had transposed 2 digits. He hadn't texted Clara. He had texted a complete and total stranger. A wave of nausea, hot and acidic, rose in his throat. "No," he whispered, the word a puff of air. "No, no, no." He snatched the phone back up, his fingers clumsy and shaking. The battery icon flashed a final, desperate red warning. "I am so sorry," asterisk he typed, his movements frantic. "Wrong number. Please disregard. I am so incredibly sorry." He hit send. The message seemed to hang in the digital ether for a moment before the screen flickered, went black and died. The low battery chime never even had a chance to sound. He was plunged into silence, broken only by Lily's ragged breathing. He had just bared his soul, his most profound shame and fear, to a random person. He had become a digital spectacle, a pathetic story someone might tell over brunch. "You'll never believe the text I got last night." He slid down the wall, the rough texture of the plaster catching on his threadbare shirt, until he was sitting on the floor, Lily still cradled against him. He buried his face in the soft, feverish curve of her neck, inhaling the scent of baby shampoo and sickness. The heat of her skin was a brand. He had never felt more alone. His cry for help had not just been ignored. It had been misdirected, lost in the infinite, uncaring cosmos of the internet. It was the perfect, cruel punchline to the joke his life had become. Alara's phone chimed again. She picked it up, expecting perhaps a follow-up, a request for a Venmo handle. Instead, it was a new message from the same number. "I am so sorry. Wrong number. Please disregard. I am so incredibly sorry." The tone was completely different. The raw desperation was gone, replaced by a stark, formal humiliation. He wasn't asking for anything anymore. He was retracting his vulnerability, trying to shrink back into anonymity. He was embarrassed. And then nothing. No typing bubbles. No further replies. Alara stared at the two messages side by side. The first, a heart ripped open. The second, the attempt to stitch it back up, hastily and alone. She imagined him, somewhere in the sprawl of the city, his phone dying, his child sick, sitting in the dark with the weight of his mistaken confession. Her fortress, built brick by brick with her success, had its first crack. And pouring through it wasn't a threat or a demand or a scam. It was the silent, echoing aftermath of a stranger's despair. Excellent. The spark has ignited a slow-burning fuse. Let's see how both Leo and Alara react to the unsettling new reality. The silence in Alara's penthouse was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. The two text messages on her screen glowed like embers in a dark room. She placed the phone face down on the counter, the cool glass a stark contrast to the unsettled heat in her chest. "Disregard," she said aloud, the word tasting clinical and absurd. How does one disregard a seismic tremor of human need? It was like trying to unsee a car crash. Her boardroom-honed mind, a machine designed for risk assessment and strategic advantage, kicked into gear. Scenario analysis, it demanded. Possibility 1. An elaborate con. It was possible. The follow-up apology text was a masterstroke, adding a layer of believable humility. The next move would be for him to realize his mistake, and, flush with shame, refuse the money she hadn't even offered, thereby making her insist on giving it. A classic reverse psychology play. Possibility 2. It's genuine. This possibility was somehow more terrifying. If it was genuine, then she was now aware of a tangible, solvable problem. A child was sick. A man was drowning. And she possessed a life raft the size of a yacht. Her wealth, which usually felt like a tool or a weapon, now felt like a responsibility. A burden she had never asked for. She poured the untouched bourbon down the sink, the amber liquid a wasteful sacrifice to her sudden clarity. She couldn't engage. She wouldn't. Engaging was the gateway to chaos, to emotional entanglements, to being used and discarded. David had discarded the person for the monument. She would not let a random text shatter the very thing that kept her safe. She would delete the thread and block the number. It was the only logical course of action. Her fingers, however, seemed to have a mind of their own. Instead of deleting, she opened a secure browser on her laptop. She had resources. A private investigator on retainer for corporate due diligence. With a few keystrokes, she drafted an email, her tone detached and professional. Michael, I need a discreet background check on a phone number. Primary focus. Confirm identity of the holder, one Leo Thorne if possible. Cross-reference for any criminal history, financial liens, recent major life events. Discretion is paramount. Report SAP. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. This wasn't engagement, she reasoned. This was data collection. This was verifying a threat model. She was fortifying her defenses, not lowering the drawbridge. On the cold linoleum of his apartment floor, Leo felt the weight of a different kind of resistance. The resistance of a world that had stopped listening. His dead phone was a symbol of his isolation. He was cut off, adrift. Gently, he laid Lily in her crib, her whimpers having subsided into an exhausted, fitful sleep. Her breathing was still too quick, too shallow. He plugged the phone into a charger hidden behind a stack of books and watched the empty battery icon appear, a tiny, pulsing heart of light in the darkness. It would be minutes before he could turn it on, before he could see if the stranger had replied with scorn or mockery or worse, pity. He paced, the shame burning hotter than Lily's fever. He had exposed his failure to a stranger. He, Leo Thorne, who had once built custom dining tables for families to gather around, who had prided himself on his self-reliance, had been reduced to a digital beggar. It doesn't matter, he muttered to the empty room, his voice harsh. It was a wrong number. They've already forgotten about it. You're a ghost. But the act of sending the message had changed something. It had broken a seal. The desperate energy now released into the world had to go somewhere. His eyes fell on the small wooden box on the shelf, the one thing he had refused to pawn. Inside was Clara's wedding band. A fresh wave of grief, sharp and specific, washed over him. He could see her slipping it off her finger to knead bread dough, her laugh filling their old, sun-drenched kitchen. Asterisk, it's just a thing, Leo. We're the real treasure. Now it was the last thing of hers he had. Selling it felt like a final betrayal, an admission that the life they'd built was truly, irrevocably over. But Lily's soft, ragged breath from the crib was a more powerful argument than any memory. The phone vibrated, chiming to life. He lunged for it, his heart hammering against his ribs. The screen lit up, displaying his home screen. A picture of a smiling Clara, pregnant with Lily, her hands resting on her belly. No new messages. No notifications. The stranger had indeed disregarded him. The relief was so potent it felt like a poison, leaving him weak and hollow. He was alone again. Truly alone. The brief, terrifying connection was severed. He opened his contacts, his thumb hovering over his brother's number. He could call. He could swallow what was left of his pride. But the memory of his brother's weary, sympathetic tone from their last call stopped him. Asterisk, Leo man, I'd love to, but with the new baby, you know how it is. He closed the contacts. He wouldn't. He couldn't. The resistance inside him was a solid wall, built from grief and a stubborn, foolish pride that was all he had left. He would find another way. He had to. He looked from the dead phone to the wooden box holding the ring, then to his daughter in her crib. He was trapped in a triangle of impossible choices, and every path forward felt like a different kind of surrender. When has your own pride ever stopped you from accepting help you desperately needed? What did it cost you? Excellent. The walls of resistance are up, but the foundation is about to shift. Let's move the pieces into a position where they can no longer ignore each other. The email from her investigator, Michael, arrived in Alara's inbox just after dawn. She'd slept fitfully, if at all, her dreams punctuated by the sound of a crying child that wasn't there. She clicked it open, the clinical detachment of the report a welcome antidote to the emotional chaos of the night. The data was stark and unforgiving. Subject: Leo Thorne. Age 32. Status: widower. Spouse: Clara Thorne née Miller. Deceased 14 months ago. Postpartum embolism. Daughter: Lily Thorne 8 months. Employment: former proprietor of Thorne and Splinter woodworking shop. Business dissolved 10 months ago due to outstanding debts and loss of primary investor following spouse's death. Current employment: part-time stalker, City Grocers. Financials: 3 maxed out credit cards. Eviction notice filed for apartment 4B 1217 Oakview Terrace. 30-day notice. Criminal record: none. Not even a parking ticket. Recent life events: pediatrician visit for L. Thorne yesterday. Diagnosis: acute otitis media. Prescription: amoxicillin suspension. Ilara leaned back in her chair, the leather groaning softly. The air left her lungs in a slow, controlled exhale. It was all true. Every heartbreaking word. There was no scam. There was only a man who had lost his wife, his business, his financial stability, and was now on the verge of losing his home, all while trying to care for a sick infant. The data painted a portrait of a cascade of tragedies. A man being systematically dismantled by fate. The part about the business, the primary investor, pulling out, that resonated with a dark, familiar chord. She knew that world. She lived in it. The cold, calculated retreat at the first sign of instability. She had done it herself, countless times. Her eyes lingered on the line about the eviction notice. 30 days. He was living on borrowed time in a place that was killing his daughter with damp and despair. Just then her personal line chimed, a different, softer tone. It was the head of the Vance Foundation, her multi-billion-dollar philanthropic arm. They were finalizing the annual gala, a glittering event where she would pose for pictures with large ceremonial checks. The hypocrisy of it in that moment was so vast it was almost comical. She could fund a dozen pediatric wings without blinking, but the thought of directly helping one specific named child and her father felt terrifyingly intimate. The data had forced a new, uncomfortable proximity. This was no longer an abstract plea. This was Leo Thorne. This was Lily. They had names, histories, and a countdown clock ticking over their heads. She opened the text thread with the unknown number. The 2 messages were still there. His desperation. His apology. She typed a single line, her thumb hovering over the send button for a full minute, a war waging inside her between the fortress and the crack in its wall. The morning light did nothing to warm apartment 4B. It only served to highlight the dust motes dancing in the air, the peeling paint, the profound shabbiness of it all. Lily's fever had broken slightly, thanks to a half-dose of infant Tylenol he'd scavenged from the bottom of a diaper bag, but she was listless and clingy. The knock on the door when it came was firm and official. Leo's heart plummeted. The landlord? Had he come to personally escort him out? He opened the door to find a woman in a crisp, no-nonsense pantsuit, a ID badge hanging from a lanyard around her neck. She introduced herself as Ms. Evans from the Department of Child and Family Services. A routine follow-up, Mr. Thorne, she said, her smile not unkind but professional. The hospital flags cases for a wellness check when a child is admitted with a high fever. Leo's blood ran cold. She wasn't admitted. It was just a doctor's visit. Of course, Ms. Evans said, her eyes already scanning the room over his shoulder, taking in the single crib, the makeshift kitchen, the palpable damp in the air. May I come in? The next 20 minutes were a slow-motion nightmare. She asked gentle, probing questions about his support system, his income, his childcare plans. She noted the empty formula can. She subtly checked the water temperature from the tap and frowned at the lukewarm result. She asked to see the prescription for Lily's medicine, and Leo's stammering explanation that he was getting it today landed between them with a thud. A child's health is the paramount concern, Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice soft but firm as she handed him her card. An environment that contributes to illness. It raises flags. I'll be filing my report. We'll be in touch. Please, get that medication for Lily today. After she left, Leo stood frozen in the center of the room, her business card feeling like a lead weight in his hand. This was it. This was the consequence he had been desperately trying to avoid. They could take her. The state could come and take his daughter away from him. The thought was so violent, so fundamentally wrong, that it stole the air from his lungs. He was out of options. Out of time. Out of pride. He stumbled to his phone, his only thought to call someone, anyone, to bear witness to this fresh hell. But as he picked it up, the screen lit up with a new notification. Not a call. A text. From the unknown number. His breath hitched. He fumbled, nearly dropping the device, and opened the message. It wasn't words. It was a notification from his banking app. A deposit. For $5,000. And below it, a single line of text from the stranger, the millionaire, the ghost. For the medicine. And a better apartment. The world tilted. The eviction notice, the social worker's card, the dead phone, the pawned watch, the memory of Clara's smile. It all swirled together into a roaring cacophony in his head, silenced only by the staggering, life-altering number on his screen and the 9 words that accompanied it. The forced proximity was no longer digital. It was financial. It was real. And there was no walking away from it. Of course. The forced proximity has created an undeniable and deeply uncomfortable connection. Now the walls must come down further, revealing the ghosts that haunt them both. The $5,000 sat in Leo's account like a foreign entity, a benevolent virus that had infected the bleak code of his financial reality. He stared at the number on his phone screen until the digits lost all meaning, morphing from a miracle into a question mark and finally into an accusation. Charity. The word echoed in the hollow space Clara had left behind. Tasted like ash. His first visceral instinct was to send it back. To type out a terse, proud message. I appreciate the gesture, but I can't accept this. And reclaim the shattered pieces of his dignity. But then his eyes fell on the social worker's business card, propped ominously against an empty baby bottle. An environment that contributes to illness. And he heard Lily's soft, congested breathing from the crib. This wasn't about his pride anymore. This was about a roof. This was about medicine. This was about keeping his daughter. He went to the pharmacy first, the transaction feeling surreal. The pharmacist handed over the small bottle of pink, life-saving liquid without a second glance. The cost, a little over $100, was a pittance against the balance in his account, and the disparity was dizzying. He then went to a small family-owned Italian grocery he remembered from better days and bought real food. Fresh fruit he could mash for Lily, ingredients for a proper meal. The simple act felt revolutionary. But the money and the stranger who had sent it loomed over him. He couldn't just take it. He couldn't live with the anonymous, faceless pity. He needed to look her in the eye. He needed her to see that he wasn't just a sob story. He was a man. A failed one, perhaps, but a man nonetheless. He picked up his phone, his thumb trembling only slightly. The money is... Thank you. You didn't have to do that. But I can't just... I need to thank you properly. In person. I'm good for it. I will pay you back. Every cent. He held his breath, waiting for the typing bubbles to appear, for a rejection, for silence. The reply came a minute later, succinct and wary. That isn't necessary. It is for me, he typed back, the words feeling like the truest thing he'd said in a year. A long pause. Then, the Atrium Cafe. Grand Meridian Hotel. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. 1 hour. Elara arrived 20 minutes early. It was a tactical decision. She chose a table in the back, partially shielded by a large, sculptural fern, giving her a panoramic view of the entrance. She needed to see him before he saw her. She needed to assess the threat, to match the data from the report to the living, breathing reality. The cafe was her territory. The hushed clink of fine china, the scent of expensive coffee and polished marble, the muted conversations of the powerful and wealthy, it was the ecosystem she dominated. She wore it like armor. A tailored, cream-colored pantsuit, her hair a severe, sleek bob. She was the monument, impenetrable. When he walked in 10 minutes early himself, she recognized him instantly from the driver's license photo in the report. But the photo hadn't captured the weary slope of his shoulders, the way his eyes, a warm, troubled brown, scanned the room with a kind of bewildered resilience. He was wearing a clean but faded flannel shirt and jeans, and he carried himself with a quiet, physical solidity that seemed utterly out of place amidst the cafe's ethereal elegance. Looked real. He saw her. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment the carefully constructed space between them vanished. He didn't smile. He just gave a small, grave nod and made his way to her table. "Alara?" he asked, his voice deeper than she'd imagined. "Leo," she acknowledged, not offering her hand. "Please sit." He sat, his large frame looking awkward in the delicate chair. He didn't fidget. He just placed his hands, strong hands with scars and calluses she could see even from across the table, flat on the surface. Craftsman's hands. I don't know what to say," he began, his gaze direct, unwavering. "What you did. For Lily. It was a logical solution to a verified problem," she said, her tone cooler than she intended. She took a sip of her water. "The data was clear." He flinched, almost imperceptibly, at the word data. "Right. The data." He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "I'm not a data point. I'm a father who made a mistake texting a number. And I'm a woman who verified a story before acting," she countered, her defenses rising. "It's what I do." "What you do," he repeated, a flicker of something, pain, understanding, in his eyes. "You build walls out of spreadsheets." The accuracy of the statement stunned her into silence. He saw it. He saw right through the billion-dollar armor to the terrified woman building fortresses. "I had a partner once," he said, his voice softening, shifting. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking through the window into the past. "David. We started a business together. A small tech startup. He was the charisma, I was the drive. We were a good team. Or so I thought." Alara went very still. The name, the context, it was too familiar, a ghost from her own life stepping into the room. "When things got hard," Leo continued, the words coming slowly, painfully. "When we hit a rough patch with investors, he emptied our business accounts. Took everything. Said I was too much of a risk, that my passion was unsustainable. He left me with nothing but debt and a lesson in how quickly people can become strangers." Alara felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't her story, but it was the mirror image of it. The same betrayal, the same language, just from the other side. David had left her for being a monument. He had left this man for being too human. Her carefully constructed cynicism cracked. The subtext of his story wasn't a plea for more money. It was an offering. It was him saying, "I understand what it is to be betrayed. I understand walls." She looked at his hands again, at the scars earned from building things, not from typing on a keyboard. She looked at the raw honesty in his tired face. And for the first time, the name, David, didn't feel like a scar. Felt like a key. "The primary investor for my woodworking shop," Leo said, his voice a low rumble. "His name was David. He pulled out 2 weeks after my wife died. Said the narrative was too emotionally volatile for his portfolio." The echo was deafening. Alara couldn't speak. She could only look at him, truly look at him, and see not a project, not a data point, but a man who had been shattered by the same cold, transactional world she had learned to master. The mystery of their connection hadn't intensified. It had been solved. And in the quiet of the opulent cafe, the weight of their shared, hidden truth settled between them, changing everything. Absolutely. The foundation of shared understanding has been laid. The silence that followed Leo's revelation was different from any that had come before. It wasn't the cold, empty silence of Alara's penthouse, nor was it the desperate, fearful silence of Leo's apartment. This silence was thick with shared recognition, a quiet understanding that hummed between them in the opulent cafe. Alara was the first to look away, her gaze dropping to the untouched espresso in front of her. The name, David, was no longer a weapon from her past. It was a bridge, twisted and strange, connecting her world to his. She had built her entire identity on being the opposite of the risk David had accused her of being. David had accused her of being. Leo had been destroyed for being the volatile narrative David had run from. They were two sides of the same coin of betrayal. The medicine, she said, her voice softer now, the boardroom edge gone. Did it work? The simple human question seemed to startle him. He blinked, pulled from his own painful reverie. Yeah, it did. Her fever broke last night. He slept. For the first time in days she actually slept. The relief in his voice was a tangible thing, warm and real. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, and it transformed his entire face, smoothing the weary lines around his eyes. She's still clingy, but she's my little girl again. Ilara found herself mirroring the smile, just a faint curve of her own lips. That's good. The words felt inadequate, but they were the truest she'd spoken all morning. I found an apartment, he said, the words tumbling out with a nervous energy. Not far from here, actually. A 2-bedroom in a decent building. It's clean. It has windows that actually open. The landlord said it's available immediately. He looked at her, his expression a complex mix of gratitude and lingering shame. I used part of the deposit, for the first month's rent. That was its intended purpose, Ilara said, but there was no sharpness in it. It was a simple fact. I know. It's just... He trailed off, struggling for the right words. It's one thing to see a number on a screen. It's another to walk into a place and know that because of that number, your daughter will have a room that isn't damp. He swallowed hard. Thank you. This time the thanks landed differently. It wasn't a transaction. It was an acknowledgement. Their hours stretched into 2. He told her about Clara, not with the devastating grief of the night before, but with a fond, aching nostalgia. He talked about her laugh, how she could never keep a plant alive, how she'd believed in his shop more than he ever had. Ilara listened, truly listened, not as a problem to be solved, but as a story to be honored. And slowly, tentatively, she began to share in return. Not about David, that wound was still too fresh, but about the isolation. The way people looked at her now, either as a wallet or an obstacle. The silence of her success. I have a board member who calls me ma'am, she said, a wry twist to her mouth. He's 70 years old. He's terrified of me. Sometimes I want to tell him I still binge-watch terrible reality TV and eat cereal for dinner, just to see if his head would explode. Leo let out a surprised, hearty laugh. The sound was so rich and unexpected that several people at nearby tables glanced over. What's your cereal of choice? A shamefully sugary one that would appall my nutritionist, she confessed, and this time her smile was real, reaching her eyes. It was in that moment, over the absurdity of cereal, that the last vestiges of their roles, the penniless single dad, the female millionaire, truly dissolved. They were just Leo and Ilara, 2 people in a cafe, finding an unexpected, quiet solace in each other's company. He walked her out to the hotel's grand entrance, where a sleek black town car was idling by the curb. The driver stood ready, holding the door open. The new apartment, Ilara said, pausing before she got in. When do you move? Tomorrow, Leo said. It's empty. But it's a start. She nodded, a decision crystallizing in her mind. Give me the address. I'll have my assistant send over some things. Furniture. Kitchenware. Things for Lily. Leo's first instinct was to refuse, to say he had it handled. But he looked at her, not at the millionaire, but at the woman who had just shared a laugh with him, and saw that the offer wasn't about charity. It was about connection. It was about helping a friend move into a new home. Okay, he said, the word feeling like a leap of faith. Thank you, Ilara. She gave him a final, small smile before sliding into the car. As the door closed, Leo stood on the sidewalk, the city buzzing around him. For the first time in over a year, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a possibility. The bond, fragile and new, felt like a rope thrown to him in a stormy sea. He dared to believe he could actually hold on. The new apartment was a revelation. Sunlight poured into the living room, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny celebrations. It was clean, it was safe, and the silence was peaceful, not oppressive. For 3 days, Leo and Lily existed in a state of blissful, disbelieving calm. The move had been chaotic but filled with a strange, new energy. A moving company, arranged by Alara's assistant, had efficiently transported their meager belongings. The crib, a few boxes of clothes, the photo of Clara, and his toolbox. True to her word, Alara had furniture delivered. It wasn't ostentatious or overly expensive looking, but it was solid, comfortable, and beautiful in a simple Scandinavian way. A sturdy oak table that wouldn't wobble. A soft, gray sofa. A beautiful handcrafted rocking chair for Lily's room. Felt like a home, not just a shelter. Felt like a future. Leo sent her pictures. Lily sitting in the high chair that had appeared one afternoon, smearing banana on the pristine tray. The view from the window. A close-up of the wood grain on the table. She loves the chair, he texted. I think I'm jealous of a piece of furniture. Her replies were brief but warm. The grain on that table is beautiful. She has good taste. It was on the 4th morning, as Leo was unpacking the last box. His woodworking tools, the familiar weight of his chisels and mallets a comfort in his hands, that the official-looking envelope arrived. It was mixed in with a flyer for a pizza place. Thick, cream-colored paper, his name and new address printed in a formal font. His heart for a foolish second leapt. Maybe it was from Alara. A card. Something. He tore it open. It was from a law firm he didn't recognize. Vance, Sterling and Colt. His eyes scanned the legalese, his brain struggling to parse the meaning. It was a deed of trust. A legal document outlining the anonymous prepayment of 1 full year's rent for the apartment. And attached to it was a summary for a newly established Lily Thorne Educational Trust, with an initial deposit amount that made his knees go weak. He stumbled back, the paper crinkling in his tightening grip. The numbers swam before his eyes. It wasn't just the furniture. It wasn't just the $5,000. She had bought the very air they were breathing for the next year. She had secured a future for his daughter so distant he hadn't even dared to dream of it yet. And she had done it all anonymously. Through lawyers. The warmth of the sun on his back suddenly felt like a lie. The beautiful, solid table felt like a cage. The rocking chair in Lily's room wasn't a gift. It was a down payment. This wasn't help. This was a takeover. This was what she did. She saw a problem, his life, and she used her wealth to systematically solve it, to erase it, to make it neat and tidy and manageable from a distance. She had verified the data, implemented the solution, and closed the file. The lunches, the laughter about cereal, the shared understanding over the name David. It had all been part of the process. The human touch to make the transaction palatable. The bond he had felt, the fragile, beautiful connection. It had been an illusion. He wasn't a person to her. He was her good deed. Her $1 billion charity case for the year. A cold, sharp fury, born from a year of grief and humiliation, ignited in his chest. It was cleaner than shame, more powerful than despair. He grabbed his phone, his fingers ice cold, and called her number. He went straight to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He texted instead, the words blazing with a pain he could no longer contain. The lawyers just sent me the paperwork. The rent. The trust fund. Was any of it real? Or was I just your good deed for the year? Was I your way of feeling human again? Tell me, Alara, was our entire connection just a transaction? He didn't wait for a reply. He threw the phone onto the new sofa where it landed without a sound. He looked around the beautiful, sun-drenched apartment at all the beautiful, expensive things, and all he could see was the price tag. The price tag on his dignity. The price tag on his hope. He was no longer drowning. He had been rescued, scooped out of the water and placed in a gilded tank, and the humiliation of it was infinitely worse than the struggle to stay afloat. Alara was in a high-stakes merger negotiation, her focus absolute, her demeanor a masterclass in controlled power. Her phone, on silent, was face down on the table. When the screen lit up with his text, she didn't see it. It was 2 hours later, during a recess, that she picked it up. She read his message. And the world, the powerful, commanding world she had built, crumbled into dust around her. She saw it instantly. Her terrible, catastrophic mistake. In her mind, the trust and the paid rent had been the ultimate gifts. The final solution. The things that would truly set him free, that would remove the sword of Damocles hanging over his head. She had done it through lawyers to remove the awkwardness, to make it clean, to give him the space he might need without her looming presence. But he didn't see freedom. He saw ownership. He didn't see a solution. He saw the erasure of his struggle, which was also the erasure of his worth. She had done the one thing she swore she wouldn't. She had used her money as a bulldozer instead of a bridge. She had proven his deepest fear and her own, that she didn't know how to be a person, only a benefactor. Her hands trembled as she typed a reply, her mind screaming, trying to find the words to fix the unfixable. Leo, no. That's not what it was. It was supposed to give you peace. It was supposed to, asterisk. She backspaced, erasing the excuses. She tried again. Please let me explain. I was trying to help. Again she deleted it. Every word sounded hollow, pathetic, confirming his accusation. A final message from him came through. It was a picture. Not of Lily or the sunny apartment. It was a picture of his old, scarred wooden toolbox, sitting open on the beautiful new floor. I'm a craftsman, the text below it read. Not a project. Don't contact us again. The shatter point had been reached. The bond was not just broken. It was pulverized. And in the deafening silence of her corner office, surrounded by the symbols of her immense power, Ilara Vance had never felt more powerless or more alone. Excellent. The shatter point has left them in emotional ruins. Now we enter the quiet internal storm where the real battle is fought. The new apartment was a tomb. The sunlight that had felt so hopeful days before now felt accusatory, illuminating the emptiness that had taken root inside him. Leo moved through the rooms like a ghost, the silence broken only by Lily's coos, which now felt like echoes in a cavern. He had packed a small bag for them both, a primal instinct screaming at him to flee this gilded cage, to go back to the honest struggle of his old life. But he looked at his daughter, sitting on the beautiful soft rug, happily gumming a teething ring. Her cheeks were rosy, her eyes clear. She was safe. She was healthy. Because of Ilara. The truth was a double-edged sword, and it was cutting him to pieces. His pride demanded he rip up the lease, withdraw Lily from the trust, and walk away with nothing but his shattered dignity. But his love for his daughter, a force infinitely more powerful, asked a terrible question. Would your pride keep her safe? Would it keep her warm? He picked up his chisel from the open toolbox, the cool, familiar weight of the steel a comfort. This was who he was. A maker. A fixer. He had tried to fix his broken life with his own two hands and had failed. Ilara had tried to fix it with her wealth and had failed even more spectacularly. But was it really about fixing? Or was it about connecting? He thought of the cafe. The way her eyes had lost their icy shield when he'd talked about Clara. The genuine sound of her laugh when he'd asked about her cereal. That hadn't been a transaction. That had been a crack in her own armor, just as his text had been a crack in his. They had both been vulnerable, and for a few precious hours they had been real. His anger began to cool, leaving behind the cold, hard sediment of a more complex truth. He had accused her of seeing him as a project. But wasn't he guilty of the same? Hadn't he, on some level, reduced her to the caricature of a cold, lonely billionaire? Had he ever truly tried to understand the woman who was terrified of being seen only for her money, who had, in her own clumsy, catastrophic way, been trying to protect him from the very hardship she'd seen destroy her own mother? The choice before him was no longer about pride versus practicality. It was about fear versus courage. He could choose the safety of his anger, the familiar territory of being wronged. Or he could choose the terrifying vulnerability of trying to understand. Of reaching out not to accuse but to connect once more. He put the chisel down. He wouldn't run. But he couldn't stay like this. He had to make her see. Not with words, but with the only truth he had left to give. Ilara stood in the center of her penthouse, the panoramic view a mocking reminder of her isolation. She had instructed her assistant to cancel all her meetings. The multi-billion-dollar merger could wait. Nothing mattered. She had reread their entire text history, from his first desperate plea to his final devastating rejection. She saw her own actions with horrifying clarity. The immediate transfer of funds. The background check. The furniture. the trust. Every single step had been taken from a position of power, of removal. She had been the CEO of his rescue operation and she had managed him right out of her life. He was right. She had turned their connection into a transaction. She had been so terrified of the messy, emotional reality of it that she had tried to bureaucratize it into something safe and sterile. The choice before her was agonizingly simple, yet felt impossible. She could respect his demand. She could retreat. She could lock the drawbridge, return to the safety of her monument, and let the memory of Leo and Lily become just another painful ghost in her silent halls. It was what the old Alaire would have done. The one who was terrified of being too much. Or she could choose to be vulnerable. Not as a billionaire, but as a woman who had made a colossal, heartbreaking mistake. She could choose to risk the ultimate rejection by reaching out one more time, not with money or lawyers, but with the one thing she had been too scared to offer. Her imperfect, flawed, and completely human self. But how? Words were inadequate. A text would be ignored. A phone call would be rejected. He had to show him. He had to prove she finally understood. Frantically, she began to search online, not for solutions but for him. For the man he was before she entered his life. She searched for thorn and splinter. She found a defunct website, a few scattered reviews praising his work. And then on a forgotten image-sharing site she found it. A gallery of his work. A dining table with a river of inlaid walnut. A rocking chair with lines so graceful they looked like a captured melody. A jewelry box exquisitely carved. And then she saw it. A small, simple, hand-turned wooden spindle. It was for sale on a craft site listed months ago, one of the last things he'd made before his world fell apart. The description was his, she could hear his voice in it. Asterisk maple spindle turned by hand. Smooth finish. Made to create. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about the creating. The making. The worth he found in his own two hands. This was it. This was the choice. He bought the spindle. Not with her assistant, but herself, entering her own credit card details, typing in her own shipping address. His address. It was a small, insignificant object. It cost $40. But it was the most important purchase of her life. She didn't include a note. The object itself was the message. It was her saying, asterisk I see you. Not the project, not the single dad, but the craftsman. The creator. And I am not here to save you. I am here to love you, asterisk. Now all she could do was wait. The choice had been made. The next move was his. Of course. The choices have been made. Now we bring their journey to its emotional conclusion. 3 days passed. The apartment no longer felt like a tomb, but it wasn't yet a home. It was a waiting room. Leo had unpacked his tools properly, setting up a small, temporary workbench in a corner of the living room, a declaration of intent. He was staying. But the silence was a heavy blanket, smothering the hope that had briefly flickered there. Lily was his anchor, her innocent demands for food and play forcing him through the motions of life. He was changing her on a towel on the floor when the doorbell rang, a sharp, intrusive sound that made his heart jolt. It wasn't her. He knew it wouldn't be. It was a delivery person with a small, flat cardboard box. His name and address. No return label. His first icy thought was that it was from her lawyers. Some final piece of paperwork to sever them completely. He carried it inside, his hands unsteady, and placed it on the beautiful oak table. He stared at it for a long time, Lily crawling at his feet. Finally, with a resigned sigh, he slit the tape with his thumbnail. Nestled inside, cushioned by plain brown paper, was a small hand-turned wooden spindle. Maple. Smooth. Unmistakably his work. He lifted it out, the familiar, perfect weight of it a shock to his system. It was one of the last pieces he'd made, a simple thing, an exercise in finding peace at the lathe when the world was falling apart. He'd sold it online months ago, needing the cash for formula. And now it was here. There was no note. No explanation. No credit card receipt. Just the spindle. He sank into a chair, the spindle cradled in his palm. And he understood. This wasn't a gift of money. It wasn't a solution handed down from on high. This was an echo. An echo of the man he used to be, the man he still was beneath the grief and the fear. She wasn't giving him anything. She was giving him back to himself. He had listened. She had truly heard him. And in sending this, she was saying the only thing that could possibly bridge the chasm between them. Asterisk, I don't want to fix you. I love the craftsman. Asterisk. The walls of pride and anger, so carefully constructed, crumbled to dust. There was no fight left in him, only a vast aching need to see her. He didn't text. He didn't call. He picked up Lily, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door. Alara had spent the days in a state of suspended animation. The monument was cracked, and she had no desire to repair it. She paced the length of the penthouse, the silence more oppressive than ever. She had thrown her choice into the universe, a single fragile thread cast across a canyon. She had no idea if it would hold. When the intercom buzzed, her entire body went rigid. It was her doorman. Ms. Vance? There's a Mr. Thorne here to see you. With a child. Her heart stopped. Then it hammered against her ribs, a frantic wild bird. She couldn't speak. Miss Vance. Send them up, she managed, her voice a strangled whisper. She stood in the center of the room, her hands clenched at her sides, utterly exposed. The elevator dinged softly. The doors slid open. He stood there, Lily on his hip, her head resting on his shoulder. He looked tired, but the defensive anger was gone from his eyes. In its place was a raw, open vulnerability that was far more powerful. In his free hand he held the spindle. For a long moment they just looked at each other, the space between them charged with everything that had been broken and everything that could be. You bought my spindle, he said, his voice quiet, echoing in the vast space. I did, she whispered. He took a step into the room, then another, until he was standing right in front of her. He didn't try to touch her. He just held out the spindle, offering it back to her. It's yours, he said. But I was hoping I could make you something else. Something new. For you. With you. Tears, the first she had allowed herself in years, filled Alara's eyes, blurring his face. He wasn't asking for anything. He was offering everything. I was wrong, she said, the words torn from a place deep within her. I was so scared of the mess, of the need, that I tried to put it all in a box I could control. I treated you like a problem to be solved. I'm so sorry, Leo. He reached out then, his free hand coming up to gently cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. The touch was electric, a current of pure, undiluted connection. I was wrong too, he said. I was so busy being the proud, struggling father that I couldn't see the woman who was just as scared as I was. I didn't want a savior, Alara. I just wanted you. The last of her defenses dissolved. She leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. I don't want to save you, she breathed, echoing the promise she'd sent with the spindle. I just want you. And Lily. A small, sleepy sound came from his shoulder. Lily had lifted her head, her big brown eyes blinking at Alara. She gave a gummy, curious smile. Leo smiled, a real, full, unreserved smile that reached the corners of his eyes. I think, he said softly, that can be arranged. He didn't move into the penthouse. The fortress was abandoned, not for a new cage, but for a home. They found a house, a real one with a yard and a garage he could convert into a workshop. It was theirs. A place where the scent of sawdust could mix with the aroma of her terrible, sugary cereal. The story didn't end with a wedding, but with a quiet, powerful image of a different kind of union. Leo, at his new lathe, shaping a piece of cherry wood into the leg of a new dining table. Alara, sitting on the floor a few feet away, helping Lily stack colorful blocks. The evening sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes, not of despair but of a life being built piece by hand. He looked over at them, at the two most beautiful things he had ever helped create. one from love lost, one from love found. He caught Alara's eye, and she smiled, a smile of pure, unguarded joy. It was love at last, the most unexpected and therefore the most precious kind of all.